At the end of World War II, there were Japanese commandos who loaded bombs onto fighter planes and committed suicide attacks by crashing into enemy battleships. It was an inhuman strategy that sacrificed the young soldiers, especially student soldiers, as expendable. Japanese forces collided with enemy warships with aircraft loaded with bombs or torpedoes. It was one of the worst operations in Japanese history that sacrificed individual lives with a tactic to target and strike. From the point of view of the Japanese military, it was the last attempt to avoid unilateral defeat in the Pacific War, and the missions were forced suicide orders from the state. Kamikaze forces used suicide tactics where commandos loaded hundreds of kilograms of bombs into their fighters and flew straight at the enemy. The Japanese Kamikaze commando unit is well known to us today. They could not close their eyes when rushing at a target. They were taught to aim at the center of the target and shouted a slogan of death, instead of closing their eyes to increase their accuracy even a little more. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and the United States, which had been silent, entered the war in earnest. In the early days, Japan had a slightly advantage over the United States due to rapid airstrikes. However, the very next year, when Japan was defeated in the Battle of Midway, the leadership of the war was completely transferred to the United States. After that, Japan continued to suffer heavy losses, such as the Battle of Saipan, the Battle of Guam, and the Battle of Guadalcanal. In 1944, a year before the end of the war, Japan was faced with a situation where it had no choice but to give up its last line of defense, Leyte Bay, and that's when the Kamikaze operation was implemented. It was an attempt to somehow change the game of war. Japanese tactics were very simple, ignorant, and reckless. It was the tactic in which the Japanese suicide commander directly controlled the direction of the plane carrying the bomb and collided with the target. Two typical planes were used for this tactic. One was the Ki-115 Trugi. As soon as this fighter was in the air, the wheels were removed immediately, which meant the crew could never land. In a nutshell, the idea was not to come back after being in the air and to commit suicide no matter the circumstances. Another was the MXY-7 Orca. The Orca flew under a huge bomber, and when an enemy came within a certain distance, it was detached from the air and fired immediately. Inside the Orca was only a 1,200 kilogram bomb and the man who controlled it, namely a missile with a man on it. For reference, the word Orca means cherry blossoms, and the cherry blossom pattern drawn on the Orca also conveyed the meaning of falling like a cherry blossom for the emperor. About 3,300 suicide commandos carried out attacks during World War II, and about 3,900 people were killed in these reckless operations. However, despite these sacrifices, the accuracy rate was only 60%. Even in the United States, people saw this unfamiliar tactic and called it a fool bomb. Usually, when you shoot down an airplane, the aircraft breaks into pieces and goes down, but the suicide commander plane continued to fly even as it broke. Even though he knew he was going to die, he did not protect his own life. At the end of the war, even broken fighters and training planes were mobilized. For reference, the name Kamikaze had been used in the past and evoked strong wind and rain. In the 13th century, Mongolia and Korea formed an allied army and went on 2 expeditions to Japan. At the time, Japan had never suffered an all-out invasion. and it was a very unfavorable situation in which the victory of the Goryeo and Mongol forces was almost certain. However, on their way across the Strait of the Korean Peninsula, a devastating storm engulfed the invading forces completely. From the Japanese point of view, it was said to have been the wind of a god, so it was named Kamikaze in Japanese. The Kamikaze commander also came to be used with the belief of being protected by the gods. The United States continued to advance in the war, and as Japan struggled to defend itself, it ran out of pilots to fly the fighters. And finally, in 1943, a student mobilization order was issued. The Japanese entered junior high schools and educated their students to participate in battles. Although it was not possible to receive proper training and education, commandos were produced through 3 years of education at the Junior Air Force Academy. Later, the training period was reduced from 3 years to 16 months to fill the workforce more quickly. They trained junior high school boys for about a year and made them pilots. The inexperienced fighters unfortunately became victims at a young age. Most of those who entered the Kamikaze died at the age of 19. Since the Kamikaze strategy is a form of loading a person on a missile, they needed the means to get rid of fear. So it is said that the leadership gave the pilots a drug called heroin. The Kamikaze commander also mixed alcohol and methamphetamine the day before the sortie and gave it to the commanders so they could carry out their mission without feeling fear and tension. As there were commandos who attacked in the air, there were operations that sacrificed the soldiers' lives even at sea. There was a manned guided torpedo called a Gyron. This was also a human torpedo that was driven by a human and crashed into a target. It was a strategy to shoot torpedoes carrying people from a distance where they could dodge the attack. It is said that the pilot on board was never able to escape due to external water pressure. It was a non-human self-destruct weapon that was controlled by a person riding inside and collided with a target, sacrificing its occupants. Whether it was Kamikaze or Gyron, this was a reckless tactic that showed how much Japan's war leadership immorally disregarded human life.